So Arnold, in your last book, The Ever-Shrinking Fighting Force, you point out that the fighting force is actually decreasing while our defense budget is increasing. What do you mean by this?
Well, let me start with a bigger strategic framework because I think it's important to understand the kind of world we live in today. China's on the march, Russia's on the move, Iran's on the verge of a nuclear weapon, North Korea continues to build their nuclear capability and rattle the saber. We live in a very dangerous and unstable world, worse than the peak of the Cold War, in my personal judgment. So our senior military leaders have said for some time, going all the way back to General Joe Dunford when he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs, we need 3 to 5% real growth in our defense budgets to implement the national security strategy, started with General Jim Mattis when he was Secretary of Defense, carried on by the Biden administration, 95% the same, where China is the pacing threat. We've got to basically really shift our focus to the Indo-Pacific. And so all of these things are correct. Here's the big problem. Our defense budgets have actually been going up in constant dollars and in current dollars. It's higher than the peak of the Reagan buildup, and yet what we're purchasing with those dollars, the active duty warfighting force is 50% smaller. We have fewer naval combatants. We have fewer Air Force squadrons. We have fewer Army brigades. We have fewer Marine battalions. Any of the measures of merit that you would like to see in terms of your fighting capability, as the budgets have gone up, that capability has gone down. So when we're buying these major weapon systems, the GAO just came out with a study just within recent days confirming what I say in the ever-shrinking fighting force when it comes to the fact that the DoD spends over $400 billion a year on goods and services, supplies and equipment, including the major weapons. What you can sum up the results, the output is spend more, take longer, get less. And then we can talk later maybe about the all-volunteer force and the unsustainable costs there. And so the challenge is basically not how much we are spending, because we're spending a fortune. It's what do we get for what we spend, and we should be measuring outputs, not inputs.
And so I'm sure your book has some recommendations. So what's the solution, or what do you recommend?
Well, I would say there are 3 main areas. First of all, I mentioned the acquisition, the purchasing of goods and services, supplies and equipment. This has been something that the Department of Defense, the Congress, think tanks, business organizations have tried to reform for years and years and years, but it's a massive bureaucracy inside the Pentagon. We used to be able to go from contract to first flight of a fighter aircraft in 5 years. Now it takes us 25 years. China can do it in 5 years. So basically streamlining the acquisition process, getting the red tape and bureaucracy out of there. The big problem starts when the Pentagon comes up with their requirements. I say facetiously, tongue-in-cheek, if the Army could get away with it, they would want a nuclear-powered tank that could fly itself to the battlefield. Technically not feasible, cost-wise totally prohibited. But they set these gold-plated requirements, and then they expect industry, and they don't talk to industry when they're doing it, about whether it's technically feasible and how much it would cost. So we've got to link the requirements, the acquisition, and the budget processes. So that would be one of the biggest things we could do to change it. And then we've got massive overhead in the Department of Defense. Defense-wide spending has gone from 5% of the defense budget to over 20% of the defense budget. We started with one defense agency, the National Security Agency. We now have 28, hundreds and hundreds and thousands of active duty, Guard and Reserve, defense civilians and defense contractors working in them, hundreds of billions of dollars a year. The DoD healthcare budget alone is $58 billion a year, services 10 million, beneficiaries, of which 5.5, close to 6 million are retirees and dependents. Retirees use more of the annual defense healthcare budget than does the active duty warfighting military. So my whole book is about all the ideas about reform that I've written about for the last 20 years. And while there's some interest in it, the body politic has a really hard time biting the bullet and making tough changes.
Well, I'm sure viewers and listeners want to find out more about your thoughts and stuff. Where can they get your book?
Well, you can get it on Amazon. It's called The Ever-Shrinking Fighting Force. Just dial it in or put my name in the author section of Amazon and you can get a copy.